My name is Kyle Healey, and I'm a member of the PPBSO Music Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome our next guest of the series, Andrew Lawson. Andrew, it's great to see you.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
Not a problem. So before we start here, I'm just going to read through a quick biography of you. You've been a member of the Shotts and Dykehead drum corps since 2004. Originally from Newmarket, you started drumming at 8. You previously spent 7 seasons with the Peel Regional Police Pipe Band, and before that, with the Toronto Police. We were saying just a few minutes ago, you've only played with 4 pipe bands in your career, which is a pretty impressive feat for anyone. So correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but you're a 2-time world champion, 2005 and 2015, and a 3-time world drum corps champion.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, just wanted to make sure I had my facts right. Okay, so we were talking a little bit earlier. Your first band was the Newmarket Pipe Band.
Yes.
So before we get into your actual playing career, your dad was a piper in the band.
He was, yes, in the grade 2 Newmarket Pipe Band.
Okay. So do you remember like going to the contest as a kid and following your dad around and watching the band?
Absolutely, yeah. I remember I went along to a lot of practices as well, so I was quite often around pipe bands from a very young age. I think my mom even says I started drumming around 2 years old because I did just kind of gravitate towards drumming. So after hearing pipe bands, I would just kind of bang about. I'm sure I had a wee toy drum.
That's fantastic. Do you remember who was in the band? Like
in the Newmarket, yeah, I don't have a very good recollection. I know the pipe major of the Newmarket band was John Mackenzie.
Okay.
And I've spoken since leading up to this with my dad and trying to remember people, but I believe around the time I was getting into drumming, the leading drummer in Newmarket was Rob McPhail.
Okay.
And one of the people in his corps, I believe, ended up being the leading drummer of the junior band. And so, yeah.
Right on. So, I was pretty fortunate you did that Pipe Band and Chill interview a couple of weeks ago. And I was able to go through and pick up a couple of things from it. And, talking about going to practices and watching the competitions and stuff.
Yeah.
You said that you had a pretty serious interest in listening to recordings. Your dad was a collector of pipe band albums.
Absolutely, yeah. From an early age, I think they really helped get me into bands, to be honest. Or at least around the time starting to play myself, we listened to a lot, yeah.
Now, like, would that just have been at home or like in the car on the way to practice? Like, I know for myself, like listening to those CDs, regardless of what it was, like hours and end in the car, whether it's on the way to practice or competition or whatever, those were the times that like really stuck with me listening to those.
Absolutely. It was before CDs, though, in our car. I was listening to cassette tapes.
A little bit harder to listen to the same medley over and over again, right?
Yes, I guess we had to listen continuously through albums and whatnot. I was a keen maker of mixtapes as well, actually. I was speaking recently to a couple drummers. I think I made a mixtape of drum fanfares way back in the day, just a 90-minute cassette, even some of them off of vinyl. I'm pretty sure we recorded stuff like old Alec Duthert fanfares from Invergordon and yeah. So I was a keen listener in the beginning of pipe band music for sure. And my dad was as well. So that's where I heard and got all these albums.
Well, like that recording or that best of fanfares, would you have could you play that end to end? Like if you were to put that recording on now, could you still play some of those?
I made that pretty early on. I don't think I was there for playing that kind of stuff. I probably had an idea of the groove and the rhythm to some of them, and I eventually was probably able to play. I'm pretty sure some of the famous Duthert fanfares were on that mixtape, so I was able to play some of it.
Right.
But I don't think I went out of my way to try to learn all of them by ear. I did just enjoy listening to them.
That's fantastic. Now, did any albums stand out for you? Any in particular that you listened to a lot, maybe, or really had an impact on you?
Ones that I definitely remember listening to a lot were definitely Scott Rail, Vale of Athol, No Reservations, and it helped that my eventual teacher, Doug Stronach, was a member of that band, so I was lucky enough to also have music that was played on that album. So to have, the music the band played was fantastic, but also having the ability to play along to the album and learn music that that I was already interested in, just listening to was amazing.
And to have a direct link to that band, right?
Yeah, no, of course. Other albums, I'd say at least a few of the 78th Fraser albums. The Live in Ireland is obviously a classic. I really like the Live in Canada one. The one they did in Halifax, the Megantic Outlaw album. I definitely remember listening to that one an awful lot. And I think the first Vic Police album we definitely listened to a lot. It was called Uphold the Right. But as time went on, what was their other one? Master Blasters was an album that came out a bit later from that. But yeah, that was another great album. I also really enjoyed the World's albums as they came out. I mean, I can't pick a specific year, but very end of the 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, we definitely looked forward to those coming out and listening to those and picking out your favorite medleys and listening to the bands you already knew you liked to see what tunes they were playing that year.
Yeah, before YouTube, when you had to wait until September.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Playing.
And the World's album probably in Canada wouldn't come out until close to Christmas time, so we'd be that much after the World's before we even knew what tunes some of the bands played. So, man,
what a different world. So that kind of rounds out. One of the questions that we had sent in was your top 5 pipe band albums from Ross Davidson. So I think that was 4 plus the World's series. So Ross, hopefully that answers your question. Anyway, so back to the Newmarket pipe band. You said they had a junior program. Now you'd mentioned earlier that Hugh was teaching the grade 2 drum corps, but he didn't actually have much to do with the junior band. The junior band was coming in as he was
finishing, working with the Newmarket band, I believe. I do not have a direct memory as to going to many practices and playing. I know I played a tenor drum, and we definitely went out for one competition in Barrie, which was probably 1989, maybe 1990. And other than that, I possibly did a couple functions with the band, but I do not really remember doing any of the band practices itself. I remember that I'd started lessons and snare drumming lessons, which is why I got involved with the local band, the junior band, and went on tenor because I'd only just started snare drumming. So,
anything to get you out, right? So it was from there that you went to the Invergary band, which is what Doug was teaching.
Yes. So I had an instructor in Newmarket first by the name of Chris Moran, and he was a member of the Newmarket band for a while, and then went on to play with the 78th Frasers. So I started there, and I was taking lessons with Chris and working towards playing in the Newmarket junior band. But I believe the Newmarket band itself kind of ceased to exist after the 1990 season. And so that was around the time that I started to take lessons from Doug. And at that point, we needed a band, yes.
Right. So how did you find Doug then?
It was actually on recommendation by John McKenzie. So the pipe major of the grade 2 band encouraged myself and Mike McDonald, a drummer that I ended up playing through many years with, the two of us to start going to Doug for lessons. Right.
So then Doug was Doug got you guys involved with the Invergary band, right? And that's where you that's where you sort of took off. So you joined.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that. Yeah, that was the first band I played the snare drum in.
So how old would you have been then?
I would have to guess around 10 years old, maybe. Yeah.
So you said that you'd been taking a couple of lessons from Chris, but Doug was the one who kind of got you going like in earnest and got you on the drum for the first time.
Yes, yeah.
Right. So do you remember much about your lessons with Doug? Like, do you remember like what kind of focus did he have? Was there much on theory or fundamentals? Did he have you playing scores?
It was all of the above. They were pretty structured. I still remember the books we had. We'd have a book with how the lesson went and what to work on, but we did everything from kind of like warm-ups, endurance, getting the fingers working, to working on rudiments we'd been working on for a while. We would put them in more and more complicated instances and patterns to build your ability with them and be able to put them basically anywhere,
Right.
rhythmically where they need to be. And then we'd always have new rudiments coming up next, more difficult things, constantly working through that. And then we would have a portion of the lesson where we would work on music, and we'd play drum scores, learn drum scores, and we'd get lots of feedback on musicality and playing them and everything.
Right on. Did he have you playing the solos as well, or was it mostly just the band stuff?
No, we were very encouraged to play solos. I played solos throughout all the years that I played in Invergary and was taking lessons from Doug.
Right on. So I guess Mike and Ryan then would have been playing the solos as well. Was there much of a rivalry between you guys? Were you going through the same grades at the same time?
We did. I believe we always moved up together. I think the first couple of years we played grade 4 solos, I think, for a year, played grade 3. And then I don't remember exactly how many years after that. I believe grade 2 is where we probably would have started playing MSRs and not just marches and the solos and stuff. Rivalry, not really.
A friendly rivalry.
Maybe a slightly quiet rivalry, but no, nothing severe. We were always enjoyed playing together, and the solos was just another way to keep working, keep absorbing new music and stuff. We played different music in the solos than we played in the band and stuff, so we were very encouraged to play and learn a lot of music. And as a youngster, I did. I mean, that's what kept me playing for hours and hours and hours a day, was absorbing as much new music as possible. So,
and it's always good to have people that you're going through that with, right? Like have friends to keep you, whether it's you working for them or whatever it is, to keep you motivated.
Absolutely. I think the three of us played all of our years together in Invergary and moved on together. So I think it was a great environment with Doug teaching the three of us, all of us progressing more or less the same and bringing each other along or pushing each other along. It was perfect to be in a group moving together like that, as opposed to just being a sole person out there, kind of isolated. So it worked very well, I think, for all of us.
Right on. And so Doug at the time was playing in Toronto Police.
So when he first started teaching us, he was the leading drummer of the 400 Squadron in grade 2. Yes. I believe Doug, coming over from Scotland, he was helped by Terry Cleland, who was the pipe major of 400 Squadron, and
I think he did that for a few of the guys. Did he not? I think he had a hand in, or that was something that he kind of helped do. Doug was. Anyway, right. Sorry, irrelevant.
I don't know that, but I know that was a helping hand in Doug being able to emigrate over. So he was in 400 Squadron for a good few years at the beginning of us taking lessons and stuff, and then he did move to playing in Metro Toronto later on, when we were closer to moving on ourselves, I guess. Yeah.
Right. And that would have been Drew's corps at the time?
It was, yeah.
So, how instrumental then was it with Doug helping you get into that drum corps? Was that something that you guys took on yourselves, or was that something that you just kind of wanted to do, or Doug kind of helped you along with?
For moving on to grade 1 and playing in Toronto, we were the three of us were quite big fans of the Toronto Drum Corps, especially Doug having joined it. We started to get to see some of the music, and we basically, after we competed ourselves, we quite often just sat and watched that corps. That was that's where we all pointed ourselves, and it's kind of where I guess it was destined that we would try to go and play. So
yeah, I mean, it would have been quite the corps at the time, right? Doug was there. Graham Kirkwood, I think, would have been there at the time.
Yes. Let me see if I can remember everyone. Tom Foote, Kenny Constable, Scott Curry. There was a guy named Stevie Campbell, I think. He came from I think he was from the States and played a bit of a DCI background.
All right.
Came and played. And there was a couple other people over certain years that were in there leading up to ourselves getting in the course. So yeah, we were big fans, absolutely, and enjoyed the music. And I think there was, for a good number of years, we all knew that that's where we would try to go and play. So
when did you join the band? You've been in Invergary for 2 or 3 years or 4 years at the time?
finish. We left Invergary after the 1995 season.
Okay.
And we went to Toronto, who were still practicing right after the season, because as soon as we joined, a few months later, we went to Estes Park in Colorado.
Right on. To
play a competition, and they get you to do a few other things. There were some parades and a wee concert, I think. So,
well, that's fantastic. And you said so. Your first year in the band was pretty successful. You'd said
in Toronto, yeah. The competition the next year, then the competition season in '96 was a very good year for the band. I can't remember for absolute certain, but I'm pretty sure the band won all of the competitions in Ontario, including Maxville, the North American Championships.
Oh.
It was that year, so the year I joined Toronto in '96, that was the only year I ever actually competed against my dad. At that point, my dad was in the Peel Police.
Okay.
But that was the last year he ever played. He retired after '96. But the last contest we played against each other, I think, was in California. What was that?
Pleasanton?
Yeah, we played in Pleasanton. And Peel beat us that day. So I think we'd beaten them all year, but my dad always reminds me about the last one before he retired.
The only one that matters, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that would have been your first year that you went to the Worlds as well.
In '96, yes. This is the first time I competed at the Worlds. I had been over a number of times with my dad. My dad had competed over, and I'd seen that. And even the year before, I went over just as a spectator in '95. So I'd seen the Worlds, but no, I'd never competed at the Worlds.
So that would have been quite the thing, like having seen all of that as a spectator and then getting to do it for the first time as well. Like, I'm sure it would have been overwhelming.
It was, yeah. Obviously the band had done so well in Ontario. I think we were somewhat tipped to do well. I guess it didn't quite go as well as we'd hoped. But yeah, the experience was amazing. I can't remember exact details, but I do remember being on the park. It was actually one of the last times, I think it might have been the last year, where you did both runs nearly back to back. Yeah, you would go, I think we went out and played the medley, and then you go to this little tuning circle out in the middle of the park, and you're almost right on 15 minutes later to play your MSR.
You know, I'm sure
the other way around.
I'm sure that has its downsides as well, but that always seems so appealing to me. You know, just not having to wait between the two.
Yes, yeah. I think it's probably good for the bands, but not good for the spectators that want to catch both the MSRs and the medleys. So
that's fair. That's fair. Do you remember going around? I mean, like you said, that wasn't your first trip to the Worlds, but do you remember going around and watching like some of the bigger corps play? Or
absolutely, and I probably did that even more as years passed that one. I think I was probably a bit until we'd actually competed ourselves. I think I was pretty just focused. I was young. I just wanted to do my bit right, and I didn't kind of run about and let my mind wander elsewhere. But I guess as I got a bit more comfortable competing anywhere, but the Worlds especially, I had more leeway to go around and enjoy the other bands and corps and stuff. And then in years moving forward, obviously when a qualifier was introduced, there were some years I qualified and there were some years that I didn't. So you get a bit more of a gander at bands over there if you unfortunately didn't get to play in the afternoon. Yeah.
So how long did you stick with Metro for? How long were you with the Toronto Fleet?
It was only 1 year.
Only the 1 year, and then you went to Peel.
Peel, yeah.
Right after your dad retired.
Right after.
So what brought you to Peel then?
Well, there was some changes at the end of the season after with Toronto, and the drum corps more or less left, and Drew took a break from pipe bands after that, and a bunch of the people from the corps that wanted to continue playing went to Peel, and Ryan and Mike and I just kind of ended up making the decision together that we would also go. We still wanted to play together, and it was another good band there in Ontario to play with. So because of that, and a lot of the drummers going over, I believe for that first season we had 11 snare drummers.
Oh wow!
Because Peel already had a drum corps, and then a bunch of us from Toronto went there. So there was a very big drum corps that first year.
So who was the leading drummer when you guys went over?
Craig Stewart.
Okay. And you played there for 7 years, and there was a couple of different leading drummers over that period of time, right? So did it go from Craig to Jeremy?
Jeremy was after Craig, yeah.
That's
and
Jeremy
then
Petty.
Jeremy Keddy, yeah.
Right.
And then after that it was Doug Stronach was the last leading drummer I played with in Peel.
Right on. And he was there for a fair bit of time, right? Like
I'm pretty sure I played 3 seasons with Doug before I left. It might have been 2. I don't know. It might have. I'm thinking it was 2 or 3 at least, though.
And you guys did a bunch of really like neat gigs there. You're talking about Pleasanton earlier with Toronto Police, but like you guys would have done the Paul McCartney gigs. I know you did the PASIC job down in the States.
Yeah.
Like, was that something that seemed fairly frequent? Like these kind of interesting sort of gigs would pop up.
It was not extremely frequent, but the band. So the Peel Police Band. When my dad first joined, it was a grade 2 band, but there was the T&D grade 1 pipe band. Right. Peel kind of had a merger and became a grade 1 band. But I believe it was before that maybe it was T&D had already done a gig with Paul McCartney in the past. Okay. I believe Paul McCartney, when he tours around, he knows certain cities that have bands he's played with, and then he'll add Mull of Kintyre to that set list because he knows he's got a pipe band he can play with type thing. So he called on the same people, and it was Peel Police at the time, and I happened to be in the band when he was on tour, so that was pretty amazing. I mean, there was very little to do as a drummer in that show, right? But it doesn't matter because we got to be on stage with Sir Paul McCartney. So,
and then flash forward like 10 or so years, and you kind of got to do the same thing again with Live Aid.
Live Earth, was it? Live Earth, I think. Yeah, Live Aid was in a couple of years after that. Again, I think Live Earth. Yeah, no, that was really that was interesting as well. That was really good fun. It was kind of a piece of music that was arranged by a guy named Andy Gangadine. He's a session drum set player and percussionist, and he wrote this piece for all sorts of drummers. It was us some pipe band drummers, but there was like taiko drumming, dal drummers from India, and all these different things. And he put it together, and then there was the 3 kind of rock star drummers that played it with us: Chad Smith. Oh goodness,
Taylor Hawkins.
Taylor, that's it. Taylor Hawkins and Queen's drummer. Roger Taylor.
Right.
So
a couple of neat gigs over the years, to say the least.
Absolutely, yeah. It was good. I enjoyed the kind of things outside of competing that the band allowed you to get. It wasn't necessarily a yearly thing to have a high profile kind of gig like that, but when they came along or whatever, it was great to get a totally different experience out of your efforts with drumming. So
no, for sure. So before we move into Shotts and you move into Scotland and all that kind of stuff, I've got to ask, there was say 3 or 4 leading drummers across 2 different bands. What do you remember about what was going on at the time in the bass section? Like, who was playing bass in the bands? Do you remember much of that? I know Ryan was playing in Peel for a bit, was he not?
Yeah, so Ryan started to get a bit of a repetitive strain injury with his left hand, and just decided that he was going to take a break and see what happened playing snare drum. So he took over his bass drum, and that would have been under Jeremy. I can't remember if it was the first or second year. I'm thinking it was the first year Jeremy had the band. So Ryan did bass that year. And did a really great job. I don't consider anyone that just turns from snare drum to try bass drums necessarily going to make it work, but no, he was very good. Bass section wise, most of my years in Ontario, it was not to that level of big bass section, not a lot of tenor drummers. The one bass section that was starting to look more like the modern band now was in Peel when Doug was there, and the bass drummer was Duncan Gibson, and his son
Ian.
Ian had had a tenor section going, and we worked. I don't remember the exact number. There was probably at least 5 of them. Wow. So we were playing with voicings and pitching a bit and stuff, and starting to go for that. But up until then, there was not much as far as tenor drumming in the bands I'd played in.
Right on. Okay, so fall 2003, right? The 2003 season is over.
Yeah.
When did you start talking to Jim about going to Shotts?
I spoke to Blair and Graham first because they were already in the band. I'd been watching Shotts for many years, as most drummers have, and really enjoyed the corps. But as I said in the other interview there, I didn't really think of it as an option. Like, I didn't think moving to another country and playing with a band was really much of an option. I just thought, I'm a fan of this band, and that's great. And I knew Blair and Graham and Glenn had the intentions of going over there, but I guess until I saw it actually happening and they were playing over there, that made it seem a whole lot more viable. And obviously, by that point, I guess I was maybe 23. I'd been working for a while. I wasn't really enjoying the job, the commuting and all that kind of stuff. I just thought a change, and I decided that was the kind of change, give it a try. At first, I didn't intend on living here permanently. I just intended to play with the band for a while.
So it was going to be a couple of years and then home?
Yeah, well, when I first, so after I spoke to Blair and Graham and it got to the point of actually speaking to Jim, it was a relatively short conversation. He said, Blair and Graham have kind of said you're interested and vouched for you. I trust them. If you need to come over, allowing a fair amount of time before the season starts. And you have to guarantee that you'll play in the band for at least 3 years, which I thought was pretty sensible, because I know you don't want turnover. And it takes a lot of effort to make it into a band. So you want to pay that back by giving extra seasons. And I kind of take the same line when I'm accepting people into the drum corps. I don't really want to take people in if they only want to do 1 year, because it's a lot of work to get people.
No, that's very fair. Very, very fair.
So that was the conversation. And then that was it until I went over.
Right on. So whenabouts did you move then?
So I went over, I don't know the exact date, but it was probably near the start of March in 2004. So
now, had you been there long before you went to your first practices, or was it like on the ground and then off to the band hall?
Yes, I think I went to a practice the day after I landed, or maybe 2 days.
Were you ready?
I was. I mean, I had all the music memorized, but there's ready and there's ready, and you don't know what you're about to walk into. I mean, I was definitely nervous, but I was confident. But yes, it was definitely a big step, and it was definitely tough at the start.
And you wouldn't have been the only drummer starting that year from Ontario, right? Tyler joined the band that year.
Yes. I don't know when I found that out. I mean, that must have been closer to the time of me actually going over that I knew that was going to happen. But yeah, Tyler joined the same year as me, right? Yeah.
So what was that first season with the corps like? Like, was there much of a difference from playing with an Ontario band? Like, whether it's Jim's leadership style or even just how practices are run, like, was there much of a difference that you noticed?
There was, yes. The band played separate a lot, even right up close to the season. We played probably equal amounts of time away from each other together. I seem to remember at least bands I'd played in leading up to going just played together a lot more. So the two corps kind of refined themselves a lot, and then came together for, I guess, less amount of time in the practice. Obviously, the intensity level was high. I joined the band just after they won the Worlds and the drumming title in 2003. And I was there was a few other players that joined the year I joined, but they were coming from the States, and they they came later than me, so it was basically just me and the corps that had just won the Worlds for my first 2 or 3 months of practices. So it was a very obvious sore thumb, the one sticking out.
But at least you didn't have to go looking for it, right? Like, you knew when you were in or out. There was no questioning whether it was the guy next to you.
Exactly, of course. And that was kind of the way it always was for the corps. Turnover, there was quite often a little bit of turnover, but the corps was always in a very stable state, and there would be 1, maybe 2 people joining on any given season.
I mean, I remember the first time that I saw the Shotts drum corps, and then however many subsequent years after, until Jim left the corps, it was the same core group of guys forever.
Yes, the turnover was relatively small, but yeah.
Well, that's good. What was the biggest change that you had to make to your playing when you joined the Shotts corps?
There was some technique had to adapt, but I would say things was somewhat stylistic in how we approached certain rudiments. How certain rudiments were played were a little different than I expected, but it took a higher level of technique to execute it that way.
Right.
So it's fairly small, subtle things, but there was plenty of moves that just kind of had to change and become the new baseline standard of my own playing. But it took more technique. It took more ability to actually achieve it, to actually execute it. And part of doing it definitely in the first year was not playing too loud, to be honest. Some of it was execution that really comes from height down to being very quiet, and just not playing too loud kind of helped it. So I mean, you can if you can find videos of my first 3 years in the corps compared to later years in the corps, confidence grows, stick height grows, your ability, your technique improves every year. So,
well, that's fantastic. So you joined the band for the 2004 season. It was the next year you won your first Worlds.
Yes.
I mean, and similar to 2003, you guys won the Worlds and Best Drum Corps, right? Like, that was a pretty significant day for you as an individual as well as for the band.
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously, we were ecstatic. It was amazing. So,
can you describe what that was like? Like, what it was like? Were you expecting to win anything that day? Like, what was the day like for you?
I think leading up to the Worlds, we'd won the major before the Worlds, and I don't think we hadn't won the first 2. So the first major that we won that year was the one before the Worlds, and I think we could tell the band was going very well, and obviously the band was recently crowned world champions. So I guess the feeling definitely was amongst the band that it's absolutely possible to win the Worlds. You just have to go out and give it your best and hope that it was enough. I remember coming off and thinking that the runs went very well. Absolutely, we were confident with how we played, so you can never be sure. We didn't have any idea that we had won. There was it was a surprise.
That's fantastic. And a couple of years after that, in 2008, you played the concert.
Yes, yeah.
How did you guys approach that season? Like, was there much of a difference? I know there would have been a ton of repertoire to play.
Yes, there was, absolutely. It was good fun. I think the concert was a mix of some classic music that the band had played in the past, and some new sets built in. Some of the classic stuff is stuff I totally recognized, which made it very quick and easy to learn.
Right.
It wasn't stuff I'd necessarily played before. The band did kind of in medley construction over the years, somewhat bring back some of their classic tunes. There was tunes that I really liked from World's albums long time ago that I got to play in the years that I was in the band, which was, you know, quite a treat actually to get to play stuff that you really liked when you're much younger. Yeah. And so the concert was kind of that too. I got to play some other stuff that I'd never played competitively, but stuff that I'd admired listening to on World's records and stuff like that. So,
and you've done that concert twice now, right?
I have, yes.
The second time was as a leading drummer. How did that differ? I imagine that the workload probably went through the roof.
Yes, yeah, it was an insane amount of work. It was a much different experience, and the music was all new. I wrote a new drum score to absolutely every single set that we played in that concert. So, the writing took a good 6 to 8 months. I don't know. Music just kept coming to me. Ryan just kept sending me stuff.
I love it.
So
you took over the band in the fall of 2015, right?
Yes.
That's quite the thing for a kid from Newmarket. I mean, it's like one of the biggest drum corps in the world, right? And here you are, the leading drummer of it. That's fantastic, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you.
So one of the things that we were talking about, though, was that there always was that kind of core group of people in the drum corps. And you look at the guys now, and I mean, other than yourself and I think Neil Bruce, most of that drum corps is fairly new. What was it like building like a brand new drum corps? I mean, it's and a successful drum corps.
It's hard work, definitely. Trying to find drummers, trying to find people. I think I was probably maybe at a small disadvantage growing up. I guess I'd been here long enough. I probably should have known more people, but I think coming from Canada and not knowing as widely the scene and the people in the scene, I needed help in finding enough, drummers and knowing who everybody was and stuff. But it was tough in the beginning, and I can understand it's somewhat unproven. But a number of people were there. I think Neil might now be the only one that played in Shotts before, but there were a number of people. Part of the bass section was existing members. It was tough to find people at first, and recruiting is somewhat tough business over here. There is an awful lot of very good grade 1 drum corps, and there's an awful lot of drummers, and drum corps are big. So yeah, the recruitment process is always just a bit of a job, but it's getting easier, to be honest.
And it's probably building that loyalty, right? I mean, this isn't uniquely yours. You're building that trust with the drummers, and it's a fantastic thing.
And I have a core group of people that are still here from the first year I've had the corps. And I mean, our improvements and how the whole band is going has been fantastic. So we're just kind of bringing people in and around it. As I said, with the turnover being small before under Jim, at me being the one guy that was the obvious. When I first took the corps, it was kind of me playing with a bunch of people all trying to figure out how I played at the same time. So it was a bit more difficult. It was a bit more work, but I took lots of people for kind of one-to-ones, and I learned that from Ryan. Ryan did that with the pipe corps. He would put so much time into one-to-ones with people and give them fine detail points individually. So I was doing that with the drum corps in my first year, and it really helps. And this core group of people that are in the drum corps, I think we've done well every season, but we're absolutely improving and being much more of a solid unit each year. So
no, for sure. And what about the midsection? You said that there had been some holdover there. Like, how closely do you work with them as a leading drummer? Is it something that you're really hands-on with, or do you kind of let them do their thing?
I'm very hands-on on the music side of things, and then the visual side of things is very much their own thing. I don't interfere unless it interferes with the music,
Right.
basically. and it usually doesn't. The style that bass section always played, and I see it pretty much everywhere now. The motion and the visual stuff is an aid to timing, really. So it kind of gives you an impression of the timing. So whether they're playing or whether they're not, you see that they're constantly kind of in time with the music and stuff. So there's very rarely a time, unless they're wanting to put a fun, challenging thing in and maybe can't get down to play a beat or something. That's the only time I'd ever consider saying maybe that needs to change. But on the music side of things, we work together all the time, and I'm very descriptive with what I want. And I make recordings. Actually, I've sampled all the bass section drums, and I audio edit it myself, playing to the melody, and put the bass stuff in so that they get an idea of their parts and stuff like that at home.
And I think that's fantastic. That's something that I'd like to actually talk to you a little bit more about at another time. Okay. But like, so I mean, I think it's obvious that you have like a sound in your head, right? Like you hear almost like an end product.
Yes, to a degree. Yes, when I'm composing, I would say, at least in portions of the score, I've got an idea of what the whole thing's going to be. But I also leave room for changes and what presents itself, especially when you're writing a set of tunes like a medley, where you could put everything into this reel that you've written, but you realize it's in the middle of two other reels, and you need to think about the flow and the arc of the whole section of music. Right. So I do sometimes hear something great for a tune, and I might want to chuck everything at it, but you kind of then take things out, I guess, when you're orchestrating your actual whole end product of a whole medley, for instance.
It's almost like that story arc, right? You can't let everything be climax all the time. You have to build to something.
Of course, yeah. But there's many tools for changing that. It's not just like loud, soft, or busy, easy. There's lots of things you can do, I guess, for that constant flow and then changing in intention and whatnot. Yeah.
So, I mean, you were talking about Ryan a few minutes ago and the amount of music he'd send you for the concert or doing the one-on-ones and things like that. You're working with Emmett Conway now. Mm-hmm. Is there much of a difference between the two of them as far as whether it's styles or musicality? I mean, they both kind of came through that same field marshal program. Is there much similar, like from your standpoint, from you as a leading drummer, is there much difference or similarity?
There's a lot of similarity in how they want to run a practice. They both, as you say, came from field marshal. The whole idea of how to set the band up and stuff comes from that philosophy. And the practices quite naturally run very similar to they did for all the years that I was in Shotts. I mean, the band hall's the same. We've got a drumming room. The drummers practice for a while the pipes are tuning up and stuff. And so there's a lot of similarity. There's little bits of differences maybe in their approach to the music. I think even though they both came from field marshal, they slightly express music a little bit differently. And now working, I mean, with both of them, I think I've learned an incredible amount about musicality, about how pipe tunes should be expressed, and then how that relates to how I have to play and fit with the pipe tune. But yeah, no, it's been good working with both of them. It's been relatively easy, but just works well. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So we've got a couple of questions off to the side here, and I'm going to try and come back to them. But just because we're talking about, expressing tunes and ensemble and that kind of thing, did you want to talk a little bit about like score writing and composition? And I know you have a recording and stuff ready here for us to chat about.
Yeah, hopefully that works. But well, I mean, I wasn't necessarily going to go into detail about
you don't need
any specific tune, but I mean,
But if we want to start with, say, like, Emmett sends you a recording of a new pipe tune.
Yeah.
You know, where do you start?
So I listen to it a lot. I make Emmett and Ryan were very similar. They wouldn't, like, they might pick a tune, but it might take them 2 or 3 weeks to send me the recording of the tune because they want to fine tune, making sure they know how they want to play the tune. And that's what you want. You don't want a generic recording sent to you, and then 3 months later when you're trying to play with the band, they say, well, no, I'm gonna be holding these notes more and not these ones. And so, yeah, you definitely want your recording to reflect how, as best they know they want to play the tune. You also kind of want to get a recording at a decent tempo, and that's sometimes the recordings I get are fast or slow. So luckily I know how to use audio applications. I can change the tempo a bit, but yeah, so I get a recording from Emmett, and I listen to it a fair bit, and I do my best to not have a pair of drumsticks near me when I'm listening to it for the first while. I prefer to try to get it where I can more or less hum the tune and hum the actual, like, execution and the rhythm that the pipe tune has, and melody. Sometimes I dive in and just grab sticks right away because something inspires me, but I try to listen to the tune and understand it as well as possible. Usually what happens is some portion of the pipe tune hits me with something in my head that I like a rhythm, or a rhythm comes to mind, some sort of groove or whatever, and I usually fit something in. It doesn't matter where it is in the score. I definitely don't start in the first part or the last part. It's just something happens somewhere in the score, and then I start to kind of build out from there. I usually think during composition, I think kind of like I'm the bass section more than I'm the snare section. I'm kind of thinking more of like a skeleton of where
Here are the features.
Where are the features? Where's the main points of rhythmic interest? And then I try to balance it. I don't always want to go wildly syncopated, and I don't always want to go totally straight and exactly what the pipe tune plays. Like, I want to vary as much as I can. I try to vary the kind of rudiments used. I try to vary whether the score's kind of full on or whether there's lots of space in the score. I think of it as breaths here and there where you can put gaps in, and where you choose to put them can kind of accentuate something coming up or building or stopping a build or whatever. Yeah. So what happens then between these points of interest, the kind of main accentuated beats or whatnot, could end up being quite a few different rudiments, and from there it's very gut, it's very feel, it's very what makes sense to me when I play through it, and I can kind of play through it and your main points of interest, but I can fill the space with many different rudiments, rolls, paradiddles, this, that, anything you could, and at that point it's just kind of instinctual, and I write stuff down and I play it over and over again. And sometimes things stick quickly, and sometimes I'm fighting with a tune. I don't like how it feels. I don't know. I can't exactly explain it. At that point, it's pretty intuitive, instinctual kind of stuff. And sometimes I don't even have an articulated reason. It just doesn't feel right. So I change it, or it does feel right, and I keep it. So
that's the creative process, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. No, but that's great. I mean, so it really is more of a holistic kind of understand the music, know the rhythm, know what you're trying to feature, and then
of course, and know the function of the tune that you're composing for. If you're composing for an MSR, I mean, a march, it has to swing. In an MSR, your tunes are fairly standalone. They're their own perfect individual tunes, but you're composing for a medley. You're gonna have a few jigs together, maybe up to 3, who knows. You're gonna have groups of tunes together, and as a whole you've got your entire medley where you kind of you don't want to be on the gas the whole time. As you say, there's a story arc, I guess, to a medley, and you want to try and orchestrate something that flows amongst all the tunes, as opposed to just a whole bunch of totally sectioned individual scores. And it may kind of start that way. Sometimes medleys are not perfectly constructed before they're sent to me. I'll get music in bits and we'll go, oh, maybe this tune isn't working, we'll change something. But then you turn to orchestrating. And I think I take the option of writing full scores and taking things away in the orchestration stage, as opposed to not writing enough and having to fill in spaces, I guess. So I kind of write, if the medley comes to me in pieces, I usually write each score as full scores kind of in their own right. And then we see how they work together. And that's where bass section actually can very much be part of the orchestration, where you can utilize them a lot. And then you can have, I mean, you know yourself, you take the bass drum out for a little while and it's just, there's that whole heartbeat, the bass floor of the band disappears and then you can bring it back in. Like, there's so many functions you can use in orchestration to make everything fit and flow together.
Especially when you have that rhythmical foundation of the total score, you know, to just cut out and say, you know, there's 2 bars here that we're going to let the tenor drummers or the bass drummer figure out, and it'll stay as a gap until then. I mean, it's not, you know, so I'm sure your players all appreciate you having at least that foundation there.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's get into some of these questions here, just because I know that there's some that are pretty pressing. Okay. How often do you practice, Andrew?
Well,
you feel like you're back in lessons?
That in itself has been an arc over all of my drumming. I would say, like, the biggest amount of time when I was very young and I was absorbing tons of music, it was lots and lots and lots of hours. Each major step I took going into grade 1 the first time took an incredible amount of practice. And when I joined Shotts was another major step that took an incredible amount of practice. So in bursts, I'd say you could be doing hours and hours and hours a day just to try to make that level. But I mean, on average, these days I don't necessarily even play every day. But as you're closer to the competition season, as you're into weekly practices with the band, I mean, I would play most days between band practices. Obviously I'm writing, I'm working on my execution and everything of the scores to make sure that I'm bringing my best to the practice for everyone else. I want to lead by example, so I need to be sharp and ready for practices as much as anybody else. So, but then there's breaks, and I guess this unfortunate season has been a bit of a break, which maybe helps everybody come back stronger. So right now I'm not practicing every day.
But I think that's okay. So, right, I mean, you have one-on-ones with the new guys coming in, but for now it's...
Yes.
And I think probably our last question, any plans on moving home?
Not in the near future. It's not a consideration at the moment. I mean, I'm married over here. We've got kids. They're in school here. They're actually in Gaelic immersion school.
Wow.
My wife's a Gaelic speaker. Her family's from South Uist. So her mum's first language is Gaelic, my wife's mum. So yeah, we're settled here. I enjoy being the leading drummer of Shotts, and I would enjoy continuing to be the leading drummer for a while in the band. So I don't have a plan as of yet. No, to
That's fair. Any plans on getting the kids into French immersion? I'm blown away at their ability to speak Gaelic so quickly. My daughter's going to be going into primary 4 over here. Oh, wow.
She's pretty fluent in Gaelic, so yeah, it's amazing. My son's just about to start school. He's just finished nursery, so he starts primary 1 after this summer holiday now. So
that's fantastic. Well, I mean, you're doing great work with the band. I mean, most of the comments and questions that we've been having from people have all been around ask Andrew how he gets his ensemble sound. What is it that you're going for when you're writing scores for ensemble? Like, I mean, all of these things we're incredibly supportive of what you guys are doing and just trying to get a better understanding of that. So I think
Thanks.
all in all, it's a pretty sound endorsement of you and what you're doing, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
So anyway, I think that should be it. Yeah, so Andrew, we'll have you stick around on the call. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free, but I think that should be it for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.